that. I love it. Congratulations, you're among the 71,000. My name is Nancy Niedzielski. People's Memorial Association is a member-based co-op. They've been around since 1939. I've been a member since 2005. I used their services when my first husband died, and I was so impressed with how I was treated and the lower costs that they provided over other funeral homes that I decided to become a volunteer. I was on People's Memorial Marketing Committee for many years. I developed their educational program called Got Your Ducks in a Row, which is why you see these ducks here. And I was thrilled to learn tonight that Audrey has a flyer from one of the Ducks event I did in 2017. So thank you, Audrey, for sharing that tonight. I've always said that People's Memorial is one of the best kept secrets in Washington State. And hopefully tonight you're going to hear about why that is. They have they've achieved price reduction in the funeral industry through having contracted providers. They've achieved price transparency in the funeral industry through their wonderful price surveys. They've achieved greener options through their legislative efforts, and you're going to hear about that today. Not all states have that, so we are very lucky to live in a state that has some of these green options. Beverly Trick is going to explain those for us and the benefits of those over traditional burial and cremation. I hope you'll also check out their forums. Just today we got People's Memorial forums on HH Connect, so you can find them under the other forums on our brand new HH Connect website. Those forms are really important to complete. They can help you, your loved ones, especially when a death occurs. They can reduce costs by preventing some of the arguments and fights that can occur between family members, which Beverly knows about, I know about, and have seen that. So I encourage you to go online and complete those forms. And if you need any help completing them, I'm happy to help you. Now please join me in welcoming Beverly Trick, the Communications Manager.
Thank you so much, everyone. Welcome to Greener Funeral Options. Before we get started, I think a discussion about the environmental impact of our death care absolutely requires a land acknowledgement. People's Memorial Association would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Duwamish, and Suquamish nations on which we work and live. I have a couple housekeeping items and I hope you'll forgive me. We're going to record today's presentation, so I'm a little bit stuck to the podium, but I hope that this means that it'll free up your hands to, instead of scribbling notes furiously, you can just focus in on what we're learning about. I'm going to go ahead and tackle what I'm sure will be a robust series of questions with my answers right at the end. So I hope you'll be patient and hold those till the end. And today I brought with me a number of those forms that Nancy mentioned to help you kind of in your planning process. And also it sounds like also you'll be able to get access to this online in the event you maybe smear a little pen or make some errors. Okay, I'm a little taller than Nancy, so this is a little awkward. Yeah, I can. Oh, here we go. Okay, now I won't get scoliosis. Okay, well, I think Nancy gave you a pretty great primer of PMA and what we're about. We're the oldest and largest memorial society in the country, which we're pretty proud of. I think for 84 years we don't look half bad. Our Washington nonprofit provides funeral education and consumer advocacy services to over 71,000 people that are actively members, and their friends and their family, and also just the community at large. To date, over 218,000 folks have become members. So you might imagine we stay pretty busy in the office. And when we think about how we support those people, well, doing just the types of activities that Nancy mentioned. We're working to educate our community and help rally their advocacy and their volunteerism to help make some real change in this space that is notoriously slow to change and sometimes a little on the political side, but we are really proud of the work that we've already been able to accomplish in increasing our options and our transparency in a notoriously opaque space. And we're really committed to this belief that access to affordable cremation, burial, aquamation, and natural organic reduction is a fundamental right, as well as all the important spiritual and emotional practices that go into mourning and celebrating the lives of those we've lost. If this sounds like something that maybe resonates with you and you haven't yet had the chance to become a member, I'd encourage you to think about it a little bit and maybe come get a membership application from me. Membership is a one-time fee of $50, and aside from our big lofty goals at changing the world and making funerals more affordable and accessible, I gotta admit most people are attracted to us for the price savings. I don't know if you've looked lately, but you might have noticed it's too expensive to die. So we're hoping to kind of help minimize the amount of surprises that you're faced with at the funeral home and ensure that maybe when you're walking in the door with the weight of grief on your shoulders, you don't also have to deal with a used car sales experience. So I think Nancy probably captured that really well. I'm sure many of you in this room have already had the opportunity to utilize some of our services, and you're familiar with what a game changer it can be to work with trustworthy businesses that are really there to support your individual needs and not just sell you a bunch of stuff. I'm also always looking for an excuse to sort of ring the bell of the co-op funeral home. We're actually celebrating our Sweet 16 this year. We have all of our PMA members share ownership of a local funeral home called the Co-op Funeral Home, and there's actually some folks in the room that were instrumental in the opening of this business. And it sounds pretty kooky, but it has become one of the busiest funeral homes in the state of Washington, which I think really speaks to the quality of the care that people know they can expect there, as well as the affordability of those services. So this is a banner year for them. Enough about that. Let's get to the educational side of things. I imagine an event that's going to be sponsored by an environmental committee is probably a little bit interested in this upcoming educational series I'm working on. I'm going to be hosting Green Funerals Week at the end of May, and this is, I think, my 4th year doing this. And it's one of my favorite things to do, where we spend an entire week digging deep into all of the different aspects of the environmental impact of funerals. And so I've got up here for you to take a look at the schedule. You can also visit our website, peoplesmemorial.org, to take a look or to sign up. And
can you speak a little bit slower?
Oh, certainly. Okay, so the schedule up here, I'm going to make sure Nancy can share it with you later if you're interested in maybe checking out one of these to learn about one of these subjects more in depth. Because I'm tasked with covering quite a lot of material today in a short period of time. I also almost forgot to tell you, we've got our Ducks in a Row series that Nancy mentioned. I'm going to be doing it next month at the Aljoya Northgate location. And so maybe one or two of you would like to stop by and refresh your memory on how some of this stuff works and get your paperwork updated. Okay, now to the thick of things here. You might have noticed that my presentation was called Green Options. We're getting so much curiosity from the community about what we can do to reduce the impact that we have on the earth when we die. I know I'm in good company here with perhaps being an irredeemable tree hugger. You know, when you spend your entire life recycling and bicycling everywhere and thinking about your carbon footprint, it only makes sense to extend that same concern to the way your body is cared for at end of life. One of the questions I get most often from folks is, what's the greenest option out there? And it's a tricky question to answer. I like to compare it to trying new milk. I think we all know that cow's milk, maybe not the best for us, and so maybe we're trying to be more health conscious. So we decide, I'm ready for soy milk, the time has come. So you switch over to soy milk. But then you learn, wow, in addition to not tasting great, this stuff, it really takes a lot of water to farm soy. So, well, I don't want to contribute to that problem in, places where there's lots of drought. Maybe I'll switch to rice milk. That'll be better. But then you find out, oh gosh, well, rice isn't that great for the environment either, and it's not very nutrient rich. What if I try almond milk? And so you find yourself on a quest to keep changing options until you find the one that meets your needs. And there's no perfect answer. We're just kind of put in the position of finding what comes closest to meeting our needs, and I think you're going to see death care is kind of like that as well. There's no perfect solution, but hopefully we can get you a little closer to getting the care that resonates most with you. So if you've ever had the unique and sad honor of caring for someone, you probably already know there's a lot of decisions to be made at the time, from everything with how to care for the body or what kind of service, what kind of merchandise to purchase. I know for a lot of us, COVID has really complicated our ability to grieve when we're not able to gather and celebrate the ways we're used to. It certainly has been a challenging couple of years when we've all been facing all of these choices and the complications that come with it. I think the most important thing, you have my permission to fall asleep now as long as you see this slide, okay? Nancy made me promise I would include this. I think that even when we aren't the most honest with ourselves, we've all thought a little bit about death and a little bit about the kind of care we want for our bodies, or I think a lot of us know exactly what we don't want. We probably went to a creepy funeral when we were a little kid and mom made us put a kiss on our grandpa's cheek and ooh, something creepy like that stuck with us and we thought, gosh, I never want that for myself. Well, the way that you ensure that happens is you're going to complete a disposition authorization. And this is where you spell out what you want done with your body. You can be as granular as you want or as vague. I've seen folks put in every little detail, the flowers, the color of the casket, the nail polish, and don't you dare let Susie in here, she knows what she did in 1977. You're allowed to put as much detail as you want on there. This form is for you. But I've also seen people say, gosh, you know, I don't really care that much. I don't believe I'm gonna be here. So just keep things affordable. So I hope you'll consider maybe taking a look at this form. I brought a couple with me today, and it's a legal document if you do sign it. But the best laid plans of mice and men, all of these plans that we might have set up for ourselves for how we're cared for are nothing without the people that make sure those wishes are honored. So I've also brought a designated agent form. Here in Washington, power of attorney actually expires at death. And so if you want someone particular to run point on ensuring that Susie doesn't come to your funeral and that they don't put you in that awful outfit that you hated, you're going to need to designate someone who runs point on all of those decisions. And that person's called a designated agent. So I brought both of those for you to get those wishes down in writing and get organized. A lot of people are not really too sure what they're looking for when they go to a funeral home. It's hard to know. I mean, most people might plan one funeral, maybe two in their lives, and they're not really sure where to start. And I think that if you're interested in green funerals, that's a great starting point. You already kind of have an idea of what's important to you, and maybe the type of services you're interested in. We also like to remind people, always ask price. You're never going to be impolite about asking for money, no matter what our mothers told us when we were little. That price survey that Nancy mentioned is a really essential tool in helping you get that care at a price that you can actually afford. As the funeral industry at large starts to realize what an incredible moneymaker it can be to start to expand their options to include some of these green funeral options, I think we're going to see a wider availability and perhaps a greater affordability of these services. So I did try to include some prices in here, so you can have a ballpark figure of what to expect, but expect to see some changes as become more accepted and more popular and legalized in new areas. Okay, so here in Washington, we've got 5 legal options as of 2019. There we go, that was a test to see if you didn't nod it off yet. So here in Washington, you can be cremated, of course. That's far and away the most popular choice for Washingtonians. There's burial, of course, and full body donation, but we also have alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction. And these were just legalized back in 2019, thanks to a whole lot of PMA members who worked really hard to get that law passed. And you know, I gotta say, I think the #1 reason cremation is the funeral option of choice for over 80% of Washingtonians is, okay, well, it's certainly the most affordable, and we do love to save $1 or $2. But honestly, most people tell me, well, that seems better for the environment than burial, right? And up until now, that really was kind of our best option. I found this really great and overly dramatic quote here I thought I'd share with you. Traditional funerals are on their deathbed. Dun, dun, dun. The funeral industry is a little bit uncomfortable with some of these new disposition options. But like I said, as soon as they know that there's a little money to be made, they'll be singing a different tune. I found this graphic and it wasn't too far off the mark. I found this a couple of years ago, and the Cremation Association of North America estimated that over 60% of Americans would be cremated by the year 2023. We haven't quite reached that number. I think we're still hovering at about 54%. But that's a record number of folks that are opting for this. The simplicity, the affordability, they're key. But also, again, there's this concern that we've got as we see the earth around us change so much from what it was when we were younger. People are thinking this must be the best option. Now, I certainly hope that no one thinks or takes away from my presentation tonight that there's any wrong death care choice. I think there's a place for every death care choice. The only wrong choice is an uninformed one. So if you yourself are one of those old school folks who were raised to think the right way to do this is with the nicest casket and buttoned up with a good old mass and a graveside service, I want you to do that, because that's what's meaningful to you. But what I also hear from a lot of members of the community is, that stuff doesn't feel right for me. What are my options? And so a lot of people do default to cremation because of the simplicity, but they're also really curious, well, what is actually the environmental impact of a cremation? Well, I did a lot of number crunching a couple of years ago, and let me tell you, I read some very, very boring scientific papers to get these numbers to you. The average cremation takes about 25 gallons of gas, and in that process of breaking the body down in the crematory retort, it does release the heavy metals in your body, as well as maybe any hardware that's in your body might be breaking down as well. Greenhouse gases are generated in this process. And also, I think the thing we most often overlook is that humans, us mammals, we're part of the environment. And the folks that have lovingly dedicated their careers to caring for our dead, they get exposed to all of those chemicals and hazards as well. Okay, so I'm gonna lighten the mood now that I made everybody sad. So, this is our colleague Dion Sturmer. He was down in Oregon. He's since retired. He's instrumental in the legalization of alkaline hydrolysis down in Oregon. Just about the goofiest guy I've ever known, and this is one of my favorite images. And he was so excited about this option, he climbed inside the machine to show you what it looks like. So the vision for alkaline hydrolysis, maybe you've heard it under other brand names like aquamation or water-based cremation. I've also heard it called things like flameless cremation or green cremation. The idea here was maybe to reduce some of those environmental impacts of cremation while still kind of retaining some of the same stuff, where it's simple, it maybe doesn't take up land, we have less merchandise that you gotta go buy, and also at the end you're gonna get the same type of ashes to either scatter or put in an urn, whatever you really want. And so this is a really lovely option. This is growing in popularity. I did a Google earlier, and so far we're up to 21 states in the US that have legalized this option. There's lots of other communities that are working hard to make this happen. We're pretty proud here in Washington to be leading the way, but we're also doing our part to help inform other community organizations who are like-minded about what they can do to, I don't know, stir up interest in that change and get people to show up when these bills are coming to their houses, and how we can get these options changed. So here's a little graphic of the other angle of that machine. So like I said, these are some of the names you might have heard this called. There's a brand name resumation or dissolution. And right at the front, that's actually a submarine door. That's how tight this door seals. There was a lot of pushback to this option, and I've heard this still in states where they're working to legalize it. People have some ideas about this process that aren't the most accurate, so I hope to dispel a couple of those right now. We had some opponents say things like, "You're going to dissolve my grandma in acid like the mob." No. Disappointingly, very little mob-related stuff takes place in funeral homes. So this is not acid. As you can see, even in the name, an alkaline is fundamentally opposite of an acid, of course. The other thing is people say, "Oh, you're going to boil them alive." Well, no, none of that either. None of that exciting stuff. I feel like anytime you start to get excited about death care, you're on the wrong track. It tends to be kind of a dry profession. So here's how it works. This process is going to accelerate the natural decomposition process with a combination of high-pressure water that's going to be flowing across your body. It's going to be warm, but not hot. And then there's going to be the addition of some alkaline chemicals, depending on your body composition, that are going to help that process along. and depending on your personal body, take about 3.5 to 4.5 hours to break all those bonds down. And like I said, Mythbusters. It's so tough to change people's minds. We can be very resistant to change, especially with such a sensitive subject as death. So, there aren't any cause of death restrictions for this process. There is currently a weight limit because of the shape of the machine. So, as far as I know, there's not a machine yet that can accommodate a body larger than 400 pounds. They're going to take all of your stuff off and put you inside in your birthday suit. And like I said, hot but not boiling, alkaline just a little bit to help the process. If you've ever made soap at home, use lye or potash or anything like that, they're going to be using something similar in a small concentration to help with this process. So one of the funeral directors I used to work with used to say it's like your very last spa day. You're going to need some warm water and a little fancy soap. It's going to be great. I think that might be a little too reductive, but I think for a lot of people, I've noticed that's what resonates with them about this process is you're thinking about the cycle of life. We come into the world and the waters of our mother, and then when death comes, we return to the water again. That really speaks to people, and I think we feel less creeped out maybe than some of the other options. Is for some of us, the idea of a cremation is kind of scary, or maybe the idea of being in a casket is scary, but the idea of returning to the water is kind of lovely. So I hope that you don't mind, but I did bring an image because I know lots of people are curious. As you can see here, this is what's left at the end of an aquamation. It's really similar to cremated ashes. The color is going to be a little bit lighter, just because you don't have that burning that takes place from all the carbonization. It's going to be like a fine talc. So in addition to this, there's also going to be some liquid left over at the end, and that liquid is safe to be introduced into municipal water. And any hardware that's in your body just gets power washed in the process and comes out beautifully clean. And if you choose, you can recycle it, and then those parts can be sterilized and used on other people. So people are kind of curious, like, oh no, sounds a little space-agey. It's okay, it's safe. It's 100% pathogen and disease-free. Just like cremated remains, you can touch them with your hand to do a scattering. You can put them in an urn, like I said. You can get any of those kooky products that you've seen where you can have like a record pressed with your loved one's voice or a diamond made. There's all kinds of products out there. And you can do any of the same stuff you do with cremated remains that you can with alkaline hydrolysis. And again, I know it seems kind of space-age, and I think the machine probably really drives that home with the submarine door and the sleek exterior, but it's not a new or untried technology. It's been in use for a long time. We just didn't really know about it. I want to say it started out in Europe in like 1998 perhaps, but a lot of med schools were using it as a respectful way of handling the bodies that were donated to them when they were done using them to study. So these don't seem, to me, maybe there's a little bit of academic bias there, but these are institutions that, if the Mayo Clinic's doing something, I think I feel pretty okay with it. Those folks aren't going to try something unless they've tested it thoroughly. So there's a lot of institutions that have been depending on it, but it's only now becoming available to consumers. And so I alluded to this before, but you might be curious, why would someone want this option? It's a little unusual. Well, the feeling that we have about how our body is touched and handled is really powerful. A lot of people are really interested in this reduced environmental impact. The zero emission of harmful greenhouse gases speaks to me, and I know speaks to a lot of other folks. There's a really low energy consumption. There is still a pretty good amount of water used. It's about the amount of water a normal American would use during their day. The bottom number I've found some people arguing about on the internet, so I can give you a range here. Some people estimate that the carbon footprint is about 1/6 to 1/10 of the total carbon footprint of a cremation. So we haven't completely reduced the energy being used, but we've made a substantial change. So that's a pretty big selling point, I think, for a lot of folks. So here's the other option that you may have been hearing more about in the news as it grows in popularity. I borrowed this from the folks over at Recompose. This is just a mock-up of what their facility looks like. It's a promotional photo that I think is really beautiful. So this option, natural organic reduction, is its legal name. We got this passed in 2019 on that same bill as aquamation, and it went into effect in 2020, which I'm sure you all remember was a sort of challenging year, and so getting these options, actually getting these businesses up and running and available to the public was a little bit trickier than we all expected, but now that these businesses are open and they're working, people are really flocking to these options. So I believe here in Washington we've got 4 businesses that are offering this service. 2 of them, Return Home and Recompose, PMA is working directly with, and I thought I'd include the prices up here so you can get an idea of what to expect. I didn't include the cost for aquamation because it's a little bit tricky to find pricing on that. If you work with Co-op Funeral Home, I believe that's about $1,500. But if you were thinking you might want to work with a different funeral home, you should reach out to them and see if they're offering it and what that price might be. When we did the price survey this past year, that was the first time that we asked people for the prices, and it's about 20 to 25% of funeral homes are starting to include this on their price list. So we're really encouraging folks, if you don't see it on there, ask about it, because they might not know people are interested. I think it's important to note that, as you can see here, this is a great illustration of the power of price comparison. I love both of these businesses and I work with them all the time, but you can see there's a big difference in pricing here. So doing a little bit of comparison to get an idea of what things cost and what you can reasonably afford is pretty important. So here's just a little bit of background on this process. Like I said, it's kind of making more and more media footage every day. The original creators of natural organic reduction are right here in Seattle. The folks over at Recompose, they founded their organization in 2017, and they used to go under the name the Urban Death Project. You can see why they rebranded, I imagine. But again, not a spooky, creepy project or anything. They worked with a ton of academics to test this process and make sure it was safe. The folks at Recompose worked with the Western Carolina University Forensic Anthropology Department, as well as Washington State University. And it's since been legalized in 5 other states, which is very exciting. One of the things that people are most curious about is, how much soil does that make when you compost a person? It's a little bit more than you might expect, and so for that reason, as far as I know, any of those businesses that you select this option, they're going to have an opportunity for you potentially to donate that soil. And all of them have partnerships with different land trusts here in Washington, which to me, again, as an irredeemable tree hugger, the idea that my body can become the soil that nurtures exploited land to help rehabilitate it, oh, chef's kiss, perfect, right? And when folks say to me, I don't care what happens, I just want to be a tree. If that's you, this is probably your option. I hear that a lot. It's just beautiful, the idea that something about us can live on. And so there's not currently an option where you can be a tree, but this is as close as you're going to get right now. But stay tuned, read my newsletters. If anything comes up, I'm going to tell you. So I brought a couple photos also. So these are our colleagues out at Return Home. They let me take some photos inside so you can kind of get an idea of what it's like. They have some really beautiful murals. Down in the bottom right was before they installed the art that's on the upper left. So you can kind of see what the vessels look like. And they're like big chest freezers full of straw and flowers and a person and all of the organic matter that is part of the composting process. And one of the things I really particularly like about this business is they've set it up the way they have so that people can come and visit while the composting process takes place. So the vessel will stay closed, but for some families, the opportunity to come and sit alongside their person as they slowly break down for 2 months is a pretty powerful way to say goodbye. So you can see there's some folks that decorated the outside with flags and things like that. And down in the bottom left, you can see an urn with a sample of the soil, and it, I gotta say, I got a little bit emotional the first time I got to see the soil in person. As much as we were a part of this legalization and advocacy process, and as passionate as I feel about this option, part of me still kind of thought it might not work. I don't know why. I think that's important to admit, but even I was a little skeptical. But when we went and we got to see the process being done, they invited us to touch the soil and to smell it, and I thought, God, that couldn't be any creepier. Even I am creeped out by that. But you know what? I took my mask off and it smelled like taking a hike after rain. I cried a little bit because I am a little bit of a baby. But that's just, if you're an outdoorsy person, this is a really wonderful option. It's not as creepy as we might imagine. It's just this really rich, moist, nutrient-rich soil. And you can see here that it can be portioned out. even the most avid gardener might not go through this much soil. It's enough to fill a pickup truck bed, a single person. It's a lot, right? So you can just garden your heart out and you might not need all that soil. So that's actually one of the reasons this year, one of my Green Funerals Week sessions is going to be with the folks at Recompose talking about what do you do with the soil, because there have been a lot of really interesting things that people have done with it. So, excuse me. I feel like one of the things that's kind of great about death care in the US is if none of these options speak to you, you can go back to the basics. And so I think that we would be remiss to not point out that a full body burial can be awfully damn green if you do it right. It's important to remember that here in Washington, you can only do a burial in land that's an established cemetery. So unfortunately, we don't have the ability to bury folks on their property just yet. But there's some really exciting legislation that's gotten to the state to change this law to allow people to do that. Because so many folks will, buy a nice piece of land outside of Bellingham and think, I'm going to retire here and then I'm going to spend eternity buried out on my property, and are very disappointed to find that is not legal. So hopefully we'll see some change on that. But one of the things that is really great about the classic full body burial is there's so many opportunities for you to customize this process to still incorporate meaningful ritual and faith and your community into it, and then also bring in facets that are honoring the earth. One of the biggest things is not embalming. I think that's one of the things that really drives people to cremation, is they think of embalming as very destructive to the soil, and perhaps it can be, but I did some research and was humbled to find that maybe even I did not understand embalming very well. But there certainly are some pretty powerful chemicals in there that we use to sort of stave off the realities of death. So even if you choose not to be embalmed, that's a green burial. You don't have to do any of the fancy stuff other than that. That's awfully green of you. I included a photo here of our National Cemetery for Veterans here in Washington just because it's so lovely. I mean, look at that view. Imagine looking out on that for eternity. So before I descend too deep into the beauty of the environment, let's talk money, money, money. This remains the most expensive thing you can do with your body, which seems kind of silly because it's also the simplest. How much easier could you get than a hole and a person in it and bury it up? But here in Washington, we know that the burial can range from $8,000 to $25,000, and this does not include the cost of a cemetery plot, which is wild. It looks like a typo. Even when I look at it, I can't believe how expensive this is. And again, we think maybe if we go green, there's less merchandise, there's less products, less people involved. It's still pretty pricey. You may be able to get away with $2,000, but it's not uncommon to find yourself again up at the $8,000 range, even not including that cemetery plot. So for folks that are really passionate about the environment, I encourage them even more than others to do some financial planning, because it sure costs a lot to do the right thing sometimes. In terms of green burial, we here have 6 cemeteries in Washington that are offering this, and they kind of range for how they handle this. Some of them are just like the best hippie experience you could possibly imagine. They don't even have markers. It's just they'll put a tree over your grave, and it's just really free-form and lovely. Whereas there's very classic, very historic cemeteries that will cordon off a certain portion of their property, and that'll be the green section. So it kind of just depends on, how you feel about it and what you can afford. The latter one could be a great compromise if maybe the rest of your family is buried in a cemetery and they really are pushing you to join the family. Maybe this can be a way for you to get a little bit of what you want, a little bit of what they want. So generally, when we're talking about green burial, these are folks that are non-embalmed. Generally, folks are going to be in a biodegradable container, and that can be a simple pine box with no veneer on it. That can even be a shroud or a wicker basket. And there's some really lovely handmade products out there for that. Generally, these folks are placed directly in the ground because, of course, decomposition is the goal here. We want to return to the soil, so don't want too many things getting in the way of the worms, right? This is also a really great opportunity to incorporate local plants that can thrive from the nutrients that body is going to offer. And I know for the folks up in Bellingham at Moles, their green cemetery, they actually have kind of like a catalog of all the different plants that are native to their area, and they'll have you pick out a certain tree, a certain shrub, and a certain flower that you like out of their local plants, and then those will be the ones that they plant at your gravesite, which is kind of cool. So here's a couple of images of the different things you can do. I think one of the things that I've really noticed since COVID is on this right-hand side, you can see all these people working together to lower someone into their grave. This is called participatory death care, and this is when we all get involved. We've all been sort of acculturated to think that dead bodies are icky, and they can be, but this can also be such a beautiful opportunity to really care for someone you love hands-on. And so I see a lot of people that are pursuing green options choosing it because of the way that they're able to involve their loved ones. You know, you could have your loved ones wrap you in your shroud. You know, maybe they wash your hair and dress you, and that's a way for them to get to say goodbye. Or maybe they're involved in the actual crafting of your casket or your shroud. Or maybe they're involved in the digging and the lowering of your body and the filling of the grave. There's so much really great, rich opportunity for that community involvement. And it doesn't speak to everybody, but it's certainly a return to the way that we did death care before the Civil War, which I think is really powerful. There's a couple of important things about cemeteries I want to make sure I tell you before we finish up. So I really want to leave a lot of time for questions, because I know there's a lot of them. The first thing is that if you do decide to spring for a plot, let me tell you, in keeping with Seattle real estate, it's going to cost you a pretty penny, but you should know that when you buy your cemetery plot, what you're purchasing is your right to burial, you don't own the land. And so that cemetery still gets to make the rules. So I always encourage people to be in contact with that cemetery to manage their expectations about what those rules might be. One really great example is if you are a veteran and you want to be buried in a national cemetery, they've got such specific rules, because of course, the military, you know, they want urns of certain dimensions and colors, and your monument has to match all the other ones for the aesthetic of the property. But those are private properties and they get to make those rules. And so if you have your heart set on maybe a more artistic or playful sort of monument, or you want something a little quirky, they do get the final say. So it's important to make sure that you're familiar with those rules. They do get real sensitive about the number of burials that take place in that plot, even if you want to maybe have one partner is buried, but the other wants to be cremated, and you think, oh, that'll be easy, I'll just put the urn right in there. They don't like that. So they do get to make the rules. One of the things that we've been still working on over at PMA for a number of years is that cemeteries aren't actually required to provide you a price list the way funeral homes are. So the process of getting some good quality information from cemeteries is still a little on the circuitous side. So I think that all of this really speaks to the value of planning ahead as you start to kind of dig up the answers to your questions and minimize the amount of surprises, because I think if any of us have, again, planned a funeral, you know, you've already got so much to handle. And doing a bunch of research on top of the chaos of maybe some fighting family members and trying to get money and things freezing and losing access, is we want to try and inform our loved ones what our wishes are. I really encourage you and the rest of People's Memorial to think about what you want and what's important to you, and make sure you have that conversation with the people you love, and also put it in writing. Again, your wishes are only as good as the memory of the people that know about them. So give them a gift, spell it out crystal clear on some paperwork, and make sure that your loved ones know where you put the papers. Don't hide them too good, okay? Once you take care of all those things, you can rest in peace. Just was testing you. Again, I know that this was just such a high-level view of so many fascinating subjects. I really would encourage you to join me at Green Funerals Week for any of these sessions. The first four are going to be online, so you can watch from home in your PJs and not worry about parking. But it'll give you a chance to kind of dig a little bit deeper into these subjects. And I also have a ton of other educational videos on our YouTube and our website. So if you have a particular thing you're interested in, you can sort of dig into that. And you can, like I said, there's websites right there. I'm going to go ahead and tackle some questions. I bet maybe we've got a few of them in here. What do you think? How are we doing, mic runners? Please don't be shy, I promise.
You mentioned that body parts are a hardware in your body can be reused. What kind of, I got a lot of titanium in my body. I'm just wondering what they can do with it.
Yeah. Well, depending on what your hardware is made of, yeah, they can absolutely reuse it. As a general rule, they're probably going to break it down, maybe melt it down and recast it for other people, since a lot of those pieces of equipment are specific to the size and shape of your body. But, you know, unless your family requests hardware be returned to them, which you absolutely can do, and I encourage you to explore the option. I have a little old lady best friend who, anytime she goes in for a surgery, she always asks for her old hardware because she wants to make earrings. I think she just likes to make her doctors uncomfortable, but that's certainly something that you can request. But when you don't ask for it back, you know, we don't want to waste that stuff, so it'll be returned to the company that made it, and then they can choose to break it down, sterilize it, and make new materials. Or, you know, if you really went hard on that hip and there's nothing left to use, they might just throw it away. Come on, you guys gotta be on it.
Hi. I was wondering if you could compare for us the amount of time the recompose takes as opposed to the aquamation.
Oh, absolutely.
And then following up on that, I noticed that I think recompose only has capacity for 30 active processes right now. I don't know about the other one, return home.
Okay.
So if you could kind of fill us in on those again.
Sure. Yeah, so like I mentioned, generally the process of an aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis is going to take between 3.5 to 4.5 hours, which is pretty similar to a normal flame-based cremation. But as you may know, with your experience from compost, it takes a little longer. And composting a person is a little complicated, and it actually takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And so I think that's part of the reason that some of the facilities that offer it, they don't have capacity for a ton of people, because you are going to be renting a space for a minute there in their office. I know that the folks at Recompose just moved into a new building in the Sodo area of Seattle. And I think it's kind of a small place. I just visited it recently. The folks in Auburn Return Home, I want to say they have a capacity for about 70 people, but they have a really big property. So maybe Recompose is in the process of kind of scaling up a little bit.
Question here?
I remember, and I'm already paid to be cremated. Suppose I want to get ultra green and change it. What are my options and what do I have to do?
You know, we got lots of people calling us to ask that after the late Bishop Desmond Tutu died, because he famously chose this option all the way from South Africa. And we had a lot of people say, gosh, I already planned a cremation, can I be aquamated? And the answer is absolutely yes. All you're going to want to do is contact the funeral home where you did your prepayment and let them know that you want to make a change. And they'll just have you update your paperwork. And they can just move the money right over. It might cost a little bit more than your cremation, so you might have to move a little cash around and finish funding it that way. But I'm sure that's a request they've probably been getting quite a bit. I know we have in the office. Don't be shy.
Over here.
Ooh, fabulous.
2 questions.
Yeah.
Durable power of attorney. Does that go out of existence when you die? But it doesn't go out of existence if you're unable to make medical decisions.
Yep, it's designed for folks that are alive but not able to make their own decisions.
And the other thing is, you didn't say what was the cost of cremation.
Oh yeah, oh gosh, you're right, that is a pretty big oversight. Well, gosh, we just did that price survey, what did we find? Oh, I'm embarrassed, that seems like a really obvious one. If you will forgive me a little bit of Googling, I'll give you some numbers. Oh, you guys, you really caught me off guard. That was a basic question, I didn't do the homework.
Like 850 to 1,000.
Well, I wanted to see if I could give them some numbers about the price survey so we can look at the state. Because yeah, we just published it in the last couple months, and as you'd expect, it's wildly different with no good reason. Well, I mean, capitalism. You can make some good money if you're a funeral home. 1 second. Well, I know at the at our contracted funeral homes, the price is, I want to say $795. But you know, that's only good for that contract period, so you can't really lock the price in. It's really rare to find a funeral home that will lock the price in.
Good for 2 years.
Yeah, the contract period is good for 2 years, and you know, the prices don't go up every contract period. It really kind of depends on the market. But I do hear people frequently thinking, ooh, yeah, if I prepay, I can lock it in. If you find a funeral home that tells you, ooh, yeah, that price is locked in, I really encourage you to read the fine print, because it's not uncommon for funeral homes to do some sketchy stuff to make sure they still get their money. One of the things I've seen is artificially inflating the price of the care to anticipate how much more it will cost when you do die. The other thing is that not everything will be covered. So they'll say, oh yeah, the cost is covered, but when the time comes, they'll tell your family, ooh, there's some administrative fees and some merchandise you still need to purchase and things like that. So, you know, lots of funeral homes are doing the right thing, but all it takes is a couple of them to maybe be a little sneaky, and you can really lose out on some really well-earned money. Good Lord. I am struggling with the Wi-Fi over here. I'm going to keep looking if somebody wants to ask a question while I load this page up.
There's a question right here.
Yeah, lay it on me.
I've heard about the green burial grounds near
Yes.
Bellingham. Are there others throughout the state?
Yeah, I think there's about 6 of them as far as I know.
Whereabouts are they?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do have a flyer with some of them on it for you. I did bring an assortment of flyers for you all to take with you to do a little bit of reading if you'd like. All the information is also on our website if you don't want my help cluttering up your apartment. Okay, so I've got some prices here for you. Across the state, we surveyed, I won't say 209 funeral homes, and the price of a direct, simple, no-frills cremation varies by 770%. So, I know, it's wild and there's no good reason, let me tell you. So the average cost is about $1,600. We found some places that were as cheap as $495, which seems a little sketchy, and some that were as expensive as $4,300. So if you're thinking that you would like to go with just a simple cremation, I really strongly suggest you look at the price survey to make sure that what you're being quoted is a competitive price for the market that you're in. I mean, you'd be surprised. I think a lot of us think since the cost of living in Seattle is very high, we think that that also means that funeral care is really high, but we're kind of blessed to have a lot of competing businesses in this area. So you can actually get, if you'll humor me saying so, a screaming deal on death care because all of those funeral homes are fighting for your business. So that's kind of been an interesting discovery of that recent price survey. Oh yeah.
I noticed that you said that in order to be buried on your own property, you had to be declared a cemetery. How do you do that?
Well, it kind of depends on the municipality that you live in. You would have to contact your zoning commission, and some towns are very casual about it and they just want you to file some paperwork, but some of them will charge you thousands of dollars. It's based on a municipality by municipality basis, which is one of the reasons I imagine that those folks are working to get that legislation passed to legalize it, because the burden on consumers is far too high. There's no reason you wouldn't know that. And it's just really silly. We're really in the minority in terms of states that require that additional labor to use that property that way. Hi, Anna.
I'm a former board member, and I just want to put in a pitch for PMA, and I want to say, I know several people in the room who travel quite a bit. But if you're a member of People's Memorial and you happen to have the opportunity to say, die in Hawaii or Southern California or somewhere, you can actually still call the PMA office and they will help negotiate with whoever provides immediate care for a body, and they get a funeral home discount for you. And this is like, anyway, it happened a couple times when I was just, but so anyway, PMA works for you not just here, but anywhere you might be, at least within the continental United States.
We do our best. There are a number of other memorial societies around the country, and some of them may even honor your PMA membership if you die in their service area. So anytime people are traveling, I like to suggest to them, maybe if you're a thrill seeker, or maybe if you just are a little bit realistic about your propensity for injury like myself, it's certainly something worth looking into in the area you're going into and getting a feel for things. One thing I like to suggest to folks is it can be really stressful to really think through these options and make decisions about some of this stuff. And so, especially for something like a passion for the environment, I like to suggest to people they consider writing a values letter to their loved ones to say, okay, well, it doesn't matter to me too much what you do with me, but you know I love the planet, and I want you to make the most feasible decision for my care that respects and honors the planet. I think this is a good option for those of us that are excited about compost, but you know, if you were to pass while you're ziplining in South Africa, well, it's a little tricky to get your body back here to Seattle to get that care. So if your family knows what matters most to you at the end of the day is the environmental side of things or about not going into substantial debt, that'll help guide them in making a plan B choice, because we might not always have access to our dream option. Oh yeah, go for it, Susan.
Working?
Yep.
Yeah. So the aquamation option surprised me, because I thought you were just gonna dump the body in the ocean.
Oh gosh, no.
And,
You gotta pay good money for that.
it seemed very elaborate, this
Yeah.
huge machine. So that must use a lot of chemicals and materials to make the machine.
Oh, well,
Yeah, I mean, it looked like it had a lot of metal and a lot of other stuff.
well, here in Washington, we only have one machine, so I don't know.
I mean, it just seems so high-tech compared to the way I imagined it.
Well, it's actually structurally really similar to a crematory retort, and you're going to use the same machine for a long period of time. And I'm not sure. I don't think anyone's owned one for long enough to really have a good idea of, you know, how much the maintenance and the care of the machine could maybe defray some of that environmental savings. But that's certainly a good question. I might
You
look
don't
into
own
that.
the machine, right? It belongs to somebody else.
Oh yeah, no, there's a subcontractor here in Western Washington who owns it, and he gets to run the world. He's very powerful, I imagine.
Over here, Beverly.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
In aquamation, does the body lie still or is it tumble?
Well, I imagine if you pay extra, you can do the tumble to get all the wrinkles out. Unfortunately, you're just going to lie still. I think you've earned a little rest after all this. Yeah. Don't be shy, I promise. In the last 5 years, I've heard every conceivable question.
Can I just add something then?
Oh yeah, let's hear it, Nancy.
So as a gift to my siblings, I bought a PMA membership to remind them I've given them a gift that will last the rest of their life. They just loved it.
Oh, I know. Whenever I have a bad day, I joke that I'm only at PMA for the employee discount. No, but that's a great idea. You can certainly, maybe you've already arranged for your own care, or a PMA membership isn't something you need, but it's certainly something you can give as a gift to someone else who you think might benefit from it. So just let us know if that's something you'd like to talk about, and we can help you get that set up. What do you got?
The acclimation process, I actually heard about how it works, but what's left over, it can't be just ashes. I mean, these are organic compounds. It's basically you're made into soap. That's what you're doing.
Not quite,
So,
unfortunately.
What is this stuff?
Yeah. Well, at the end of an aquamation, what's going to remain is your skeleton, and then the liquid that's left over from all of those broken down bonds in your body. And so the liquid can be discarded. You can also keep it if you want to garden with it, but that request is pretty uncommon. State law does prevent funeral homes from returning intact bones to you. They're real weird about it. So you know how after a cremation, you'll get back ashes with no recognizable pieces. That's because they take that mostly intact skeleton and then they're going to grind it down to kind of a fine powder. The same process happens with aquamation. They do have to dry the bones out a little bit before they're able to do it, but it'll be the same process.
So the chemicals that you get converted into are in the water. It's either wastewater or
Yes.
in the garden.
Yeah, it's actually really nutrient rich because the amount of chemicals added in terms of the relation to your body mass is only about 5 to 15%. So it'll give you kind of an alkaline substance, but Yeah, I've only heard of maybe 1 or 2 families that have asked for the liquid to be returned to them. It's your world and we're all just living in it, and I hope that that's the approach you take to your death care. There's no request that's too kooky.
What's the restriction on scattering ashes?
Ooh, there's lots. I actually brought a whole flyer about it because I do get questions about that a lot. And I don't want to encourage you to do anything bad, but the laws are pretty poorly enforced. So I think as long as you're courteous to others and you're not on property that doesn't belong to you, or doing something disruptive, by and large it's going to be okay. The state does prefer that when we do water scatterings, we make sure it's a moving body of water. And that you're not going to leave the ashes like in a trailhead where someone's going to tromp through it or something. But I brought a whole flyer if you'd like to take that with you just to kind of review, because that's a good thing to know ahead of time. I really encourage you to not ask your loved ones to do illegal things for you. I do come across that with some frequency. Oh yeah, what have you got?
I just have a comment.
Sure.
My husband and I were members of People's Memorial for years, and when he died, we also had a will, and we did all the paperwork and so on. We had chosen cremation and never thought, because a lot of these other options are fairly recent, and when I went to say no, he would really prefer the aquamation, I couldn't do anything because the will, they said he had signed the will, and that is the final determinant. So if people really care, do it now.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's so disappointing.
It was the least of our problems, trust me. So
I know how that goes all too well. Oh.
do it now.
Yeah.
Well, or leave it to choice.
Yeah, and I think actually that's a good point, Anna, is, like I mentioned with the values letter earlier, is you can, again, clarify for your family what your core most important thing is, and then let them make the detailed choices based on that, because you might not be able to anticipate what kind of cool stuff there is to do. If you want to be shot into space or something, maybe that'll be available by the time you pass, and you won't know. You don't want to sign up for something not quite as cool as that. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say that my wife died here, and we used Recompose.
Yeah, how was it?
It was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, good.
My 2 children were with us when she died, and we each got a nice big box full of soil. And the problem was we were going to go to our cabin in rural Montana, but the bad winter destroyed 14 miles of the road into our cabin. So we've each got plants growing in our homes. Mine's upstairs, and it is just wonderful. And I have to tell you, to me, I see cremation is against the climate change. It's just awful, and it just makes no sense. Burial just takes land away. You put the body in there and never see it again. And I'd rather we were going to the cabin to grow Janet trees. That's what we did.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Leslie. That's wonderful. Beverly? I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on Kathy's statement about a will and what you put in your will. Sure. I wouldn't recommend putting what you want in terms of cremation or anything like that in a will, where you might be doing that through notarization and an attorney. Instead, fill out People's Memorial forms, which are very easy to change at any point in time. Oh, and it's really normal to change your mind. It is. That's perfectly fine. So I'll make sure that you all have access to that, because it is a really good
The forms are now on HH Connect as of this morning.
Ooh, fabulous. Thank you. Oh yeah, Susan.
Yeah.
What do you got for me?
Well, I just wondered when is it on?
I speak Oh, perfect.
I just wondered when you mentioned giving this to your children. My daughter lives in New Jersey, So how many other states have something like this? Do you have any information on that?
Well, there are tons of them around the country, and so one of the resources that I suggest to people is the National Funeral Consumers Alliance has a website where they list all of their affiliated memorial societies, and that's a good tool, but it doesn't encompass all of the memorial societies, it's only the ones that have membership in the FCA. So that could be a great research start point, and you can also reach out to them for suggestions on other organizations maybe in that area. Because it is in kind of little pockets, and all of these organizations are by and large run by volunteers. As far as I know, we're the only ones that have paid staff in the country, and even we have a hard time getting all this work done, so it's not uncommon to have a little bit of a challenge getting through.
There's a link from the People's Memorial site to the national.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll make sure that,
If you get on the PMA, People's Memorial, I think there's a link.
yeah, here, you know what, let me show you where on our website you can find it. How's that? Okay, so if you go on our homepage, you can see all about Green Funerals Week, and you'll go to Why Be a Member, and then I'm going to try and sell you some stuff. And then down on the bottom, right here, people are curious, what happens if I move? And so there's a link right here to the National Funeral Consumers Alliance, and this is one of the places you can look for similar organizations. But like I said, there's a lot of them, and they just tend to keep a low profile. A lot of people aren't too eager to talk to us, as you might imagine.
But this means they do include these other techniques, other methods.
Well, some do.
Well, it depends on not every.
Ask.
Yeah, it's best to check in with them about it. These options aren't legalized in every state, and every state is allowed to set their own rules about death care, like about whether or not you can be buried on your property, or if there's any other specific requirements. I can tell you that there is no state in the country that requires you to be embalmed. So if anybody ever tries to tiptoe to the edge of impropriety by making you think that it's a requirement, it absolutely is not. That's one of the few universals. But it's kind of a wild west with death care laws around the country. Very frustrating. Hi.
Hi. You haven't mentioned anything about cremation with burial at sea.
That's because we don't have it in Washington.
Oh, yes, you do, because I have that.
You're getting buried at sea.
My husband.
After cremation.
I have his ashes upstairs in a pot.
Oh, to do a scattering. Oh, yeah. No, you can absolutely scatter at sea. The Environmental Protection Agency asks that you not do it too close to the shore. I think that's bad manners with the swimmers. But yeah, you can absolutely scatter at sea. Yeah, we just
scatter to drop. It's in
a
box. It's made specifically.
Oh yeah, they still consider that a scattering. I thought you meant his entire body. There's other states where, like, if you were in the Navy, you can have an intact body burial at sea, but only some states offer it, and they're very strict about it. So I was like, oh, who do you know? Very well connected. Oh yeah, what do you got? Oh, here comes Nancy for you.
The Washington State ferries allow burials, and we've been on ferries when an announcement was made, and it was a very dignified kind of thing, and the boat stopped, and people stayed where they were except for the family, and then at some point the bell rang or something to let us know it was over, and the ferry proceeded.
Yeah, it's really lovely. I've been to a couple of those ceremonies here on our Washington State ferries, and they will sound the horn. They'll generally stop the vessel and make an announcement that we're going to have a moment of silence. One thing they did start doing recently that I think is lovely is they'll record the GPS coordinates of where they stop, and they're going to give you a certificate that tells you the coordinates so you can come back and visit whenever you want, which is kind of a cool little thing to have. So yeah, I really like it. I think it's a pretty widely utilized service just because it's such a local Seattle-like thing to do. It's pretty fabulous. Don't be shy. I'll take any questions.
I just wanted to share what somebody told me after their partner suddenly died and he was recomposed. He had made a beautiful garden behind their house, and they were so happy when the compost arrived and they sprinkled it below the shrubs that he'd lovingly grown. And so that was, he said, a very good experience.
That's Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I know that sometimes it can be a little tough to ask your questions in such a large group, or maybe you're not quite sure what your question is. So I'm going to make sure that you have this, my contact information, so you can reach out anytime with your question when it occurs to you later when you're washing your hair, or just any other time. Oh, we've got someone. What do you got?
If a body is recomposed, is it permissible by columbariums to put a portion of that in an urn and be interned in an urn?
I don't see why not.
I didn't know whether there was
Yeah.
residue.
I don't know of anyone personally that has opted for that, but I think that it would be a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Just reach out to the columbarium to make sure. Those niches tend to be a very specific size, so they might have some restrictions on how much of the soil there is or how large the urn is, but I think that's a lovely option. There's some beautiful columbarium here in Washington.
If I remember right, you said that in the water one, the hydraulic something or other, that the bones do not decompose, and so then they are normally ground up and included with the ashes. What happens in the composting version with the bones?
Yeah, well, it's kind of just like your home compost. A large portion of things are going to break down. They're going to take on a lot of that water. The heat that's generated from that process is going to help to soften those tissues and break them down. But as far as I understand, there will still be some bone fragments, and those folks are also required to follow state law where they're not allowed to give you back recognizable pieces. So they'll go ahead and break those, any large pieces left, they'll break them down smaller to help with that process of decomposing fully into soil.
So that will be done by the company?
Yeah, oh yeah, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Beverly, thank you for a wonderful reading.
Oh, of course. I think Beverly has some forms up here. Oh, this is my first presentation I've organized at Horizon House. So thank you for coming. It makes me happy to see you all here. Thank you. Please complete forms, please. Thank you all so much. Please reach out to us anytime with your questions and let us know what we can do to help clear up anything you're wondering about.